Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to completely transform how you organize your digital workspace. Look, if your company's documents feel like this chaotic, tangled mess of overlapping folders and lost files, honestly, don't worry, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're walking through a masterclass on building a strategic SharePoint document management system, or DMS for short, that actually works. We're talking about turning all that digital chaos into a highly structured, fully automated powerhouse.
Okay, let's dive right into this with a question that probably hits a little close to home for a lot of us. Is your SharePoint just a glorified shared drive with better search? It's a hugely frustrating reality for so many teams out there. SharePoint has these absolutely incredible capabilities, centralized storage, version control, granular access permissions, but all too often, organizations just switch it on without any real strategy. And the result is basically a digital dumping ground that's honestly no better than those clunky legacy network drives we were all using 20 years ago.
And that brings us to this really powerful reality check. Most SharePoint DMS failures aren't technical failures, they're planning failures. This is absolutely crucial to grasp. The platform always does exactly what it's configured to do. The problem is, it usually just wasn't configured against a real plan. So it's not the technology letting you down, it's literally the lack of a blueprint.
So, to fix that, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We've talked about the glorified shared drive trap. Next, we'll hit the 6 steps to system success, then migrating your existing mess, security, compliance, and costs, and finally, maintaining your new system. We're going to break this massive IT project into logical, bite-sized pieces.
All right, Section 1, 6 steps to system success. Let's look at the blueprint for a functional DMS.
I want you to think about setting up your SharePoint exactly like building a physical warehouse. You absolutely have to build the aisles, rack the shelves, and put up the section labels before you start backing up the delivery trucks and just dumping boxes inside, right? That's what these 6 foundational steps are all about. First, you've got to define your document structure and ownership on actual physical paper. Doing this prevents teams from recreating those conflicting folder structures later on. Then, step 2, create your specialized sites. 3, configure that metadata. 4, lock down permissions using groups. 5, automate your workflows. And step 6, train your users and monitor the system. Let's look a little closer at how this actually comes together.
Now, what's really interesting here is the stark contrast between these two approaches in step 2. You might be super tempted to just build one giant flat company site for the whole shebang. Don't do it. A single flat site inevitably leads to incredibly deep, endlessly nested folders, and it just becomes a total nightmare of unmanageable permissions as your team grows. Instead, creating separate departmental or project-specific sites keeps your folder depths nice and shallow, and it makes managing those permissions significantly easier down the road.
So you might be wondering, if we aren't using deep nested folders, how do we actually organize anything? Well, that brings us to step 3, and honestly, the sheer magic of metadata. Instead of burying an important contract 10 folders deep, you just tag it, making specific fields like department, document type, or review date mandatory the exact moment a file gets uploaded. That carries all the organizational weight that those terrible, nested folders traditionally tried to handle. Honestly, skipping this step is pretty much the #1 root cause of system failure. Now, once your files are properly structured and tagged, you get to leverage step 5, which is automation. Power Automate is this incredible tool seamlessly integrated right into Microsoft 365, and it handles routine organizational processes, stuff like approvals, reviews, notifications, entirely without relying on those endless manual email chains. Remember, a document management system is really only as good as the workflows it can successfully automate for your team. Let me show you exactly what we mean by automation. Say a document uploaded to the policy documents library gets approved by a manager, boom, the system automatically moves it to the approved policies folder. But if it's rejected, it instantly pings the owner for revisions. It is literally that simple. Human error is completely removed from the equation. Nobody has to remember to forward an email or manually drag a file over to a new location.
Moving on to Section 2, migrating your existing mess. Let's talk about the crucible of the rollout.
Because, let's be real, building the perfect new house doesn't mean a whole lot if you just fill it with your old garbage, right? Most projects are definitely not a blank slate. And if you want to survive moving your old, unorganized files, you need to follow these 6 tactics. First, take a ruthless inventory. If you skip this, you are literally just migrating your existing mess into a brand new platform. Second, decide what actually moves. Please don't migrate outdated junk. Third, map your old structure to the new one. Fourth, preserve your metadata. Fifth, run a pilot with one department to catch any mapping errors early. And sixth, clearly communicate a firm cutover date. You really do not want to end up running two systems in parallel for an entire year.
All right, Section 3, Security, Compliance, and Costs. It is time for a necessary reality check.
You see, strict regulatory requirements absolutely have to be planned out during your initial structure phase. They cannot just be bolted onto the system after you launch. We are talking about things like default encryption, regional data residency, tenant-level multi-factor authentication, automated retention policies, and audited access logs. If your organization is bound by regulations like HIPAA, GDPR, or SOC 2, absolutely none of these features are optional. And trying to retrofit these rules after thousands of documents are already loaded, well, that is a massively expensive headache.
And speaking of expenses, SharePoint often feels kind of free if you already have a Microsoft 365 subscription. But you really have to consider the real-world costs hiding just below the surface. Things like higher-tier compliance licenses, intense migration efforts, crucial architecture design, power automate consumption limits, user training, and ongoing administration. So the crucial point here is this: a cheap license paired with a poorly planned rollout is actually incredibly expensive. You've got to budget for the strategy, not just the software itself.
Which brings us to Section 4, maintaining your new system. We're talking about the long game.
Because the project launch is definitely not the finish line. Without active maintenance, even a perfectly designed system degrades, and it degrades fast. You get metadata drift, where people just start leaving those mandatory fields blank. You get permission sprawl, where one-off access is granted to someone but never revoked when they leave the company. Orphan content starts piling up, and suddenly, new business processes fail to get automated, so teams quietly revert right back to those messy email chains we all hate. And all of that builds up to a pretty startling timeline, 6 to 12 months. That is the exact amount of time it takes for a beautifully designed SharePoint system to completely degrade into a chaotic mess if you don't have active reoccurring maintenance. Honestly, a quarterly permission review and a semi-annual metadata audit are really all it takes to prevent this from happening. But someone actually has to sit down and do it.
Which leaves us with one final, totally critical question for you to take back to your team. Who will step up to own your organization's single source of truth? This can't just be an IT task, and it definitely can't be left to a one-time project team that just packs up and disbands after go-live. You need a permanent business-side owner for your metadata and content governance, because without that champion, your brilliant new system is basically destined to become just another messy shared drive. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. Now get out there, plan your structure, and build something